Okay, so in this video, I want to talk a little bit about how we can have our navigation behave a little differently so that it's either going to be fixed up here or so that whenever we are on a page that scrolls, that we are able to easily get back to that navigation, especially if we're on a really long page, say on a mobile phone, for instance. Like if we, let's do a right click, let's do an inspect, and then if I were to open this just a little bit and jump over to the mobile menu, you'll see that if we, let's go to a different thing, let's go to like an iPhone 5 SE, something that's a lot smaller. And so you'll see that, like, you know, when I get down here, I've lost my branding, I've lost my navigation. So you might like it so that this stays up here and just disappears. You might like it that way, right? You might prefer that it does that and then just have like a little button that appears down here so that you can click it and then it'll jump back to the top. That's an option. We're going to address that option really quickly before we start talking about how to do something for a fixed position. So if you come back over here into your code view, that means that we would need to actually add something inside of this main navigation or outside of it. We could add something down here that's a footer outside of the main navigation. So let's do that. Let's add a footer, and inside that footer, let's make a little button of some sort. We'll say it's an anchor tag with an href, and then we'll just have it go to pound top. All right, we haven't designated anything as top yet, but we're going to. So let's just put something that says top for right now. Actually, let's just do it in all caps, or no, lowercase, I guess. Okay, and then we can also give this an ID. We can say ID, and then you could say back to top. All right, and I'm not putting any dashes or anything like that. I'll just call it that the ID is back to top so that we'll know that that's a little button. Okay, and then if I come up here, let's just give something up here the ID of top. So maybe this header, we can give it an ID equals top, right? So that that's where it would jump, is up to the very, very top. Okay, so let's save that. And the other thing that I want to do too, if I come back to my browser, is you see now I see this little top link, and if I click on it, it jumps back up to the top. Now the thing I also want to do is I want to get this main tag that's got all this other content. I want to get it so it's not sitting right up on the edge. So let's just jump over here in the CSS, and before our media query, let's do it before we get to the media query. Let's make a rule for main, and we're going to tell it to be let's say a width of like 90% or something like that. Let's see if that works for us. And then we need to give it a margin of auto, okay, so that it centers itself. Now let's take a peek and see how that looks. And if we do a refresh on it, you can see now at least it's not sitting right up on the edge, and so that looks a little bit better. Now this little top button, all right, this is one of those things where you really don't want it to be in the way. You don't want it to be too much on top of your other content. So what we can do is we can make a rule for top. Let's make it right here. And actually we called it back to top, so that's the ID name. So if we're going to target it for styling, we need to actually call it back to top. All right. And I'm going to say that the position is fixed because I always want it to be in that lower right hand corner. All right, and then we'll say right, and instead of saying right 0, let's just bump it slightly off the edge a little bit, like maybe 1em, or maybe not that. Let's just do pixels. Let's say maybe 10 pixels or something like that. And let's just start there, and then off the bottom, let's say another 10 pixels, and then we'll see what happens after that. And then let's also give because back to top is actually applied to an anchor tag, I can actually style the color and text decoration and stuff. So I'll say color is, let's say, white. So let's say FFF, and then text decoration is none. Okay. And then what we can also do is give it a background color. And let's make it that that 222 color. And let's also give it a border of, let's say, white, actually. And we can give it a drop shadow, like a box shadow. Let's just see what happens. So box shadow of, I don't know, let's do it so that it's dead on center, so 0, 0, and then we can give it maybe a shadow of, I don't know, like 5 pixels or something, and a spread of 2 pixels, or I don't know. And then let's do RGBA, and we'll make it kind of transparent, so 0, 0, 0, and then 0.3 maybe, something like that. Let's just see what happens. Oh, and the other thing I want to do too is I want to give it a border radius. So let's do border radius. Let's just see what happens at 50% so that it becomes a circle. But I think what I might have to do, because it's the word top, it's going to end up looking more like an oval. I might actually have to tell it a specific width and a specific height, but let's just see what happens so far with it like that. Let's come back here, and yeah, you can see that it's there. It's showing up. It's a little too close to the bottom corner, I think. So maybe not 10 pixels. Maybe we want it to be like maybe 20 pixels off the corner. And let's also take a look here. So where it says top, we also maybe let's give it some padding as well, because right now it's cinched right up to it. So we'll say padding, like 10 pixels all the way around or something like that. And let's just see how big that ends up being. And yeah, that's not too terrible. It's a little awkward because it actually has a word in it, and it's pretty dark. So this is where we could go and find a picture with a symbol, like with an up arrow or something. Another thing that you can do is you can find what is referred to as an HTML entity. So let's just take a look really quick for that. Let's go over here and we'll type HTML entities. And actually, we can type up arrow like that, and see what we can come up. And right with it comes up arrows, HTML, Unicode. Let's take a look at that. And these are the little codes, sort of like a copyright symbol or an ampersand symbol, and they need something really specific, right? So you can find all these different types of arrows, and you can decide if any of these are ones that you might like to use. Let's see if any of these look like they might be okay. And you could make that decision on your own. Let's see if any of these work. This one might work. Yeah. Let's see if there are any others. Yeah, I think that this one might work right here. So it looks like the Unicode then, these are the two different options, and if you see what these columns are, let's see, the columns are, yeah, so we want the hex number. Scroll back down to where I had that. So let's use this one. And you can also click like on try it. Oh, sorry, no, it's this one here, the up arrow. When it says try it, all right, you can see what the different options are. And so you could pick either one of these and it would be okay. So I'm just going to pick this. I'm going to copy that. And then we can come over here, and instead of the word top, we can put that symbol, that HTML symbol. So we're not actually using a picture, we're just using that. That's an option. We can come back over here and see what that looks like. And you can also just go find a picture of an arrow and you can just stick it right there. That's fine too. Now the thing is that I've got padding on it, but instead what I really want to do is, instead of putting padding, I could keep my padding just the way it is, but I want to do a width and a height so that I know that it's going to be a perfect square. So I could say width of, let's say 30 pixels or something like that, and then a height of 30 pixels. And we can just go from there and see how that looks. And that looks kind of crappy, but what's happening, if I blow this up a little bit, what's happening is because I have this at 30 pixels, I've also got 10 pixels padding in every direction, which is pushing it down and to the right. And so if I come back and I say, all right, well, maybe it's not 10 pixels of padding, maybe it's somewhere more in the ballpark of 5. Let's see what happens when we look at that. Oh, that's a little more centered. So we're getting closer. Maybe it needs to be pushed over a little bit more. So maybe it's something like 7 pixels, but I have a feeling top and bottom are going to be different. So let's just take a look real quick. And like I said before, I am correct. Top and bottom are different. So 7 I think is right for left and right, but top and bottom need to be less. So I would say less padding for top and bottom. Maybe let's try like 4 pixels for top and bottom and 7 for left and right. And that looks pretty centered. I think that's probably pretty good. So I'm going to zoom back out. And you could use that as your little button that takes you back up whenever you're scrolled here. So if I click on that, it takes me back up. The other thing you could do is you could make this so that it is not so heavy. Like you could make it so that the opacity is something like 0.5, like that. And then maybe we can make a hover state for back to top. Let's go copy, and we'll do back to top : hover, and we'll say opacity is 1 for solid. Let's say that, and let's come back here and let's do a refresh, and you see the opacity is lower. And see here on hover it doesn't work, you have to click it, right? But if we were to look at this not in the mobile view, then you see that it's always there, and then it becomes more visible. Now, the other thing that I would suggest if you wanted to keep something like that is that whenever you are on certain size screens, that you actually make the margin so that this is not over text, that it's in its own space. So I would say that we could actually have more than one media query. I would say that when you're on a really narrow screen like this, it's okay that it's hovering on top of text. That's okay. And you could make this even bigger if you wanted it to be like 40 pixels, 50 pixels, whatever. But then on larger screens, I would suggest that we have narrower margins. So instead of a width of 90%, maybe it's like 80% or even 75% or something. And so let's just take a quick look at, it was on main right here. So main, whenever it's on its lowest mobile screen, the smallest screen possible, we'll leave it at 90%. But that means that this is a rule that we can put inside of our minimum width media query. So let's just go up here and let's add that. So we'll add main, and we'll change the width here to, let's say 80%, and see what happens. And there, so now that button is not in the way of anything, right? So it doesn't get in the way. It's sort of, I guess it sort of does. Oh, this is because it's back in the mobile view. But when you're out here, it doesn't get in the way at all. In fact, I think I might like that button just a little bit bigger. So let's come back to the original button, and instead of a width of 30 pixels, let's see what it is when it's 40 pixels. And of course, I'm going to have to adjust the size of the padding. I think I like that size a little bit better. So maybe I'll add this. Let's see what 6 and 9 do, for instance. Let's jump back over here. And that doesn't look so hot either. So let's come back and let's adjust it again. This time let's try something like 12 pixels and 8 maybe. Let's see what happens there. And save that actually, jump. All right, and that looks a little bit better, right? And so that might be something that's a workable button that goes back to the top. And now if everything is showing, right, if everything is already showing, then that button is no good. And so one of the things that a lot of times you're going to find is that these types of buttons will only show up once you've scrolled so that this is no longer showing. The only way for us to do that though is to have this show up at that point is to use JavaScript, and I'm not going to show you that just yet. Right now though, if you wanted to have this available, you could. And you see that this 80% is it's not bad. You can have this bump out just a little bit more even if you want. and that would be okay. It just depends on, you know, where you want it to go. And then I would say that we could even use another media query. So here, let's do inspect, and let's see what the size. And if you look right here in this corner up here, as I move the width, you're going to see it shows me the width. You see that number changing right now. And so what I can do is I can say, all right, well, maybe somewhere around 400 even. No, maybe not 400. Maybe somewhere around 500 or 450 maybe. Maybe around 450 we're going to change the margins so that they're no longer 90%, right? That could be, or maybe we do want it somewhere closer to like maybe 480, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah, maybe 480, and then that'll give us a little bit more space. So we can make another media query that happens before this one. So so we don't have to type the whole thing again. I'm gonna copy the beginning of this media query, and we're gonna make some room here. And I'm gonna say, we'll go ahead and do the open and close, but instead min width here, we're gonna say, instead of 600, we'll say min width 480. And then what we can do is change main so that its width is, let's say 80%. Okay. Maybe we want that to happen sooner rather than all the way back here. Okay. So let's check that out and see how that looks. Let's do a refresh. Okay. And that button seems to be less in the way now. Right. And so then if I come here, that's 90%, and that's okay. And then we get 80%, and then out here we're still at 80%, and that's fine. Okay. So that's one way that you can deal with that. All right. And then if you decide later on some of the larger screens, maybe the position of this is like a little bit out here more or something, you know, or maybe it's just not even there. You know, you don't necessarily need it unless you've got a really long page, but on a wider screen, then it's gonna be okay. All right. The other thing is, I don't know if we have a maximum width on here. Let's check it out. On your main up here, yeah, we've got a width of 90%, but we never put a max width on there. And so you could, oh, don't want to Microsoft update right now. What you could do is you could, with this width, you could put your max width right here. That's fine. Even though it's never going to be a maximum width of 800, this rule will still, like if I wanted to put a max width of 800 pixels, let's say, I know that on a small screen, like on my mobile screen, it'll never get to 800 pixels because, you know, we have something that kicks in at 480 and at 600, right? So we could have put it down here, but I can just stick it up here and that's fine. And it'll still work on larger screens, no problem. So let's just see what happens whenever that maxes out. If anything happens where, yeah, so then it stops. And then this little button down here, you know, you may want it like on larger screens, you know, you might want it more bumped out. So maybe on, let's get rid of some of that space here. Maybe on the screens that are 600 and larger, we can have this back to top. Let's just copy this back to top. And instead of having it 20 pixels off the left and 20, or excuse me, off the right and 20 pixels off the bottom, maybe those are the two things that we can actually change. So let's come back here, and we're going to add a new rule inside of the 600 media query, and make sure you don't put it after the closing of the media query curly brace, right? Make sure it's up here. So we're going to say back to top, and we'll do right. Let's do, instead of 20, let's see what happens at 40 pixels, and bottom also at 40 pixels, and see how that looks. And that bumps it up a little bit, and I think that looks a little nicer. And then whenever we get to the smaller screen, it kind of pulls itself in a little bit, right? See, on the bigger screens, it pumps itself out. I think that works a little bit better, right? Now, the other thing that you and then you can do, see how if you hover this, if somebody can't see what that arrow is or they're not sure what that means, you can also put in the HTML on that back to top, you can also put a title on this anchor link. So in addition to href attribute and an ID attribute, you can also come here at the end inside of the opening anchor brace, you can, or bracket, you can put another space and type the word title equals, and then in the quotes you can type back to top. Okay, and then that's what's going to show up like is the little hover tip whenever you hover it. So let's do a test, and if I hover over that, you'll see that it says back to top, and it's a tip that gives me an idea of what's going to happen when I click on that link. All right, so there's that. Now the other thing that you can do too is if you don't want this to scroll off the page whenever you have a scrolling area, you can also fix that menu. All right, so this is another option, and this is the whole global nav. So if you want to go, come up here in my CSS. All right, so let's find global nav, and we're going to find the original declaration of it right here. And what I can do now is I can add, I'm going to put a little comment that says position change, okay, like this. I'm going to put it in comment marks, right, so that it's really clear that the following declarations are going to be about the position. So here I'll just say position is fixed because I want it to stick at the top. I want it to be sticky, and we'll say top is 0, left is 0, and because it is, well, let's just go ahead and say z index. We always want this to be the very top thing, so we'll say 900 or some tall number, high number, and so there's that. All right, and that should automatically do it pretty simply. Oh, except for the fact that I don't have a width set on it. I never did set the width, so that's the other thing that I would need to add here, is I'd have to say width is 100%. Okay, and let's check it out, and there it looks just fine. Now the problem, as you realize, I'm sure, is that now it's just on top of everything, right? And so if you remember, because I changed it to fixed, it literally pulls it out of the document flow. So everything that comes after it just physically moves up as if the header was never even there, or the global nav was never there. All right, and so what we need to do then is we need to come over to main. Let's find main right here. And we can either add padding to the top of main, that's one option, or we can add padding to the body at the very top. I say that we go ahead and just add some padding to main, right? And let's find the original instance of main right here. So let's say that main is going to be, let's do padding top, and let's say that's about 5M, okay? Because if you remember, whenever the navigation is closed, it's somewhere in this ballpark. We can always come back and do the math, or we can just sort of play it by ear and just test it. Let's save that, and let's come back over here. Let's do a refresh, and then you see now it's starting about 5M lower than the top of the viewport. All right, and so this just covers it up, no problem, big deal, right? And then you can open this up some more, and then it still looks fine. And then, you know, it's always going to be okay no matter how big it is, because you've sort of fixed the size. If you want it to start even lower than that, you could do like 5.5 or something, 5.5 or 6, somewhere in that ballpark, right? It's really up to you how much you would want that to come down, okay? And that looks pretty good, right? And then it looks pretty good here too. Now, you might not like the way that that covers up. So if you don't, there's some other options that you could also play with, and those options essentially would be to make this sort of semi-transparent, but then you start to get into some tricky stuff where you have to undo some of the things that we already did. But you could change this to an RGBA value if you wanted to, and the easiest way to kind of show you that, if you wanted to mess around with it, is up in the global nav. or yeah, up in the global nav, we have a background of 222. Well, the other option instead of that is we could do RGBA like this, 0, 0, 0, and then let's do like 0.8 or something like that. And then you'll see that you can slightly see through it. And that's kind of, I don't care for that as much, especially because we have those borders on there. But that is something that you could play around with doing, is having something that's semi-transparent. But I'm just going to take this back to being 222, right? And we've got our navigation that's working just fine, okay? And now this is fixed. If you don't want it fixed though, it's really simple. You just need to get rid of all the stuff that's in the position change, and also you need to change that padding on main. The top padding, you would need to take that off. All right, so that's the end of this demo, and that's how you can make a responsive navigation.